the LaxFactor podcast. What is up, college lacrosse fans? You're watching episode number 299 of the LaxFactor podcast. I'm your host, Ted Hoost, and today we are going to lead off talking about number one, Maryland and Michigan doing battle in what was the absolute game of the weekend here. Hunter Taylor's save as time expired in the second overtime was key in allowing Michigan to stay alive and win this game eventually. Ball streaking up the field off of a Michigan turnover. McDonald rips a long pole shot that is bouncing into the region of the upper right corner. Taylor somehow gets his stick on it, makes an incredible save. It was his second save in overtime. You got to love that for the kid. That allowed in the third overtime for Nick Rode to score off of an Emmett Houlihan dish to the crease, and Michigan takes this game in overtime, 3 overtimes, 11-10 over the Terps. Now, Logan McNaney had an uncharacteristically tough day overall. He made no saves off 3 shots over the second quarter, only 2 saves off 6 shots over the course of the third quarter as Michigan outscored the Terps 4-1 over that stretch. That kind of changed the momentum of the game overall, put things in control of Maryland, or put control in the hands of Michigan. Maryland was forced to try to score 2 goals late to tie the game. Not to try. They succeeded in scoring 2 goals late. Bryce Ford scores 2 goals late to force the overtime period, but it's Michigan that ends up winning here. Terps played sloppy in the overtime periods, and all 3 of them, they had 2 turnovers in each of those 3 overtime periods. That certainly didn't help their cause. 4 guys scored 2 goals in the win for Michigan. Ryan Cohen put up 2 helpers to go with his 2 goals. Jack Jenkins, Nick Rode, and Lucas Stannett were the 3 that helped Cohen out. And then Keys Van Wees had 4 caused turnovers for Michigan, so they did a great job overall. The Maryland, they got production from the guys you would expect. Urksa, 1-4. I think he only had 1 turnover, so a very good game out of Braden Urksa. Daniel Kelly, 3-1. Eric Spanos, 2-0, but Michigan did a great job of limiting the looks and the production out of the Terps' highly effective first midfield unit. Bryce Ford, as I said, had those 2 goals late to get Maryland back to within a goal and then to tie the game up and force overtime, but he had 0 points right up until he scored those final 2 goals. Matthew Keegan, who's been incredible so far this season for Maryland, he had just a single dish in the loss. And then I think, who was it? Whittier, I think, is the third guy on that line. He ends up with an assist, but they limited everybody else's production outside of that starting attack, and that played heavily in their favor. Now, I was surprised to actually learn that this was Michigan's 4th consecutive win over Maryland. Their previous wins, besides this one, 2024, Michigan won 12-11. It was actually a year ago to today. 2023, they beat them 16-11 in the regular season on April Fool's Day, and then they beat them 14-5 in an ass whooping in the Big Ten final in 2023. So Michigan has kind of owned Maryland over the last 4. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out heading into the Big Ten tournament, as both of these teams are now into the meat of their Big Ten schedule and, getting to the end of their season, which is crazy to say here. Now, after losing every one of their first tests, Michigan now has a signature win, and it's kind of the first building block in a potential tournament resume, assuming that they can now string together a few conference wins as well. They got that loss to North Carolina. That doesn't look too bad. The loss to Duke. Every game that Duke loses from here on out, that'll make that loss look a little bit worse for Michigan. That loss to Harvard, not great. Lost to Notre Dame, but hey, you get a win over Maryland, and now you have Hopkins, Penn State, Rutgers, and Ohio State to finish off the season for Michigan. I still think for Michigan to get a tournament spot at this point, especially because that loss to Duke is going to kind of drag them, assuming Duke is, going to drop a couple more here and there. I think they need to win their conference tournament, but at least they get chances to book wins over ranked opponents heading into the Big Ten tournament. I think for Michigan, if they can beat Rutgers and then any one of the 3 between Hopkins, Penn State, and Ohio State, I think that puts them in a good place heading into that tournament. And then, once again, we've seen them be able to win the Big Ten tournament. We've seen them be, they have a proclivity now for taking Maryland out. So, credit to Michigan. They played incredible defense throughout this game. Hunter Taylor got hot. They did enough offensively to pull this out. And, just an incredible game. I was one of the guys that, even though I don't think Maryland is that same team that went undefeated many moons ago here, a couple of seasons ago, looking at their schedule, I didn't think it was out of the realm of possibility that they could win the rest of the games that they played this season the way they've been playing. Not so. Michigan takes them down And the Terps fans are very sad while Michigan fans rejoice here. Another game here, Army. I've been kind of critical of Army, even though I've been being a good soldier. No pun intended, and I've been putting them where where everyone else probably has been putting them in the poll. Everyone's going to jump at the opportunity to bump Army, I think, out of the top 10 at this point after being, they're 7-0 coming into this game, but they hadn't really beat anyone. That Yale beatdown looked great early, but now Yale has proven they can't play defense, and they're not the team that we thought they were. So Army kind of proved all of us haters right on Saturday, while Boston U drops the third-ranked team in the land in OT on Saturday, thanks to a timely save out of Will Bounds that resulted in the possession that BU needed to book that victory. It was Jimmy Core that scored the game winner. Nice shot off the right wing, maybe 10 yards out off a little dink pass from Tyler Fox. That sealed the deal and gave the Terriers their third straight win over Army. Now, Will Barnes, he was a goddamn animal. 22 stops on the day. Now, both goalies played very well in cage. Sean Byrne, one of the best goalies in the country for Army, he had 18 saves in the losing effort. Barnes was just a little bit better on a day that both goalies were very good. He comes up with that OT stop, and that has to be the effort of the season out of a goaltender here. You come up with a big save in overtime. You make 22 stops on the day en route to your team beating the number 3 ranked team in the country. Got to be the game of the year out of a goaltender. I'm going to call it here right now. Not necessarily going to be by the end of the season, but right now, what a game here out of Will Barnes. Boston U is a team that I've been kind of sleeping on so far this season, despite them only having that single loss. That loss to Navy is what had me wondering where these guys stood after losing a lot of offensive talent over the course of the last 2 years. And I've been wondering, these mid-majors that have been kind of at the top of the mid-majors, Boston U, St. Joe's, these teams that have been, Towson, Loyola, a lot of these teams that have been very good consistently. I was wondering how that was all going to play out for all of them once we get past the COVID era. And Boston U, St. Joe's continued to impress here despite some weird losses that made me wonder where they really stood here. Timothy Shanahan for Boston U, 20 goals, 19 assists so far this season. He's been huge. He's just a freshman. His 2 goals and an assist helped on Saturday. Jimmy O'Connell, Andrew Pape, they each put up 4 points. O'Connell had a goal and 3 helpers. Pape 4 goals in the win. I am probably just absolutely blasting everybody out here with my audio. So I'm going to try to correct that now here, but I do see every once in a while my mic, the volume gets turned up. And as I've been recording here, I could just see this little red dot here pinging overall. Boston U now, 3-1 in the Patriot League play, 7-1 overall. They will surely pop up in the rankings after this victory. While I expect Army will probably get bumped from the top 10, they'll probably hit that 10 spot. Like I said, my biggest criticism of Army, they hadn't played anyone of note up to this point, and getting dropped by Boston U in what I'd consider to be their first true test, that's telling. Their offense is only ranked 28th in the country. Defense was coming in at number 1, but Boston U was the first team that this Black Knights defense has faced that was in the top 30 offensively, and it showed that the Army defense maybe doesn't, while they deserve the ranking of number 1 because statistically it's true, it's probably not the defense on in practice that they look to be on paper. Do I think Army is still a top-tier team? Yes. I just think that they're probably at the bottom of the top tier after this loss. Army's going to take on North Carolina next weekend, and BU is at Harvard. And now we got to talk about Syracuse. Come on, guys. We knew I was going to get to it here eventually. Luke Roa gave Syracuse a 5-1 lead with 3 minutes left in the first quarter. One of the few goals Joey Spallina didn't have a hand in on the day. The story of the day, Colgate, they would try to claw back into this game after Syracuse went up early, and then Joey Spallina would answer. Liam O'Connor scored for Colgate, making it 5-2. Joey Spallina answered early in the second quarter, unassisted, nice dodge up the right, stuck it low to high, far side, 6-2 Cuse. Spallina would score an empty netter off of a 10-man ride, just a cool goal here. Lacombe was out trying to cover Spallina, and 22 tossed it over his head from like 40 feet out. That made it 8-2 Syracuse. Colgate strung together back-to-back goals. The Connor brothers each got one, but Rory's dive from GLE to the high crease, buried at lefty. That got Colgate back to within 4 goals. 8-4 Cuse. Ensuing faceoff, Mullen tossed a BTB to Spallina. He found Deere on the doorstep to make it 9-4 Syracuse. And you're going to see a trend developing here where every time Colgate would try to claw back into this game, Joey Spallina had a hand in the goal that buried them. Jack Turner scored back-to-back goals for the Red Raiders. The second was off a tipped pass that found its way to his stick, wide open with time and room. He buried it. 11-6 Orange. A little over a minute later, who else? Joey Spallina, quick dodge up the left, got under his man just enough to get off a shot that found its way past Lacombe. 12-6 Syracuse. Ryan Favaro from Liam Connor, that made it 12-8. Joey Spallina made it 13-8 on a dodge up the right side of the cage. Inside rolled his guy once again from GLE, and now it is 13-8 Orange. Rory O'Connor got Colgate back to within 2 goals with just under 9 minutes left in the game. A goal off a one face-off, but a really confusing sequence after that goal, and I don't know what happened. It ended up being Colgate ended up being 2 men down. Syracuse has a tic-tac-toe sequence that resulted in a Spallina to Deer goal. Looked like a very nice goal, and that kind of continued things going poorly for Colgate while things went really well for Joey Spallina. Hunter Druin once again kept Colgate alive, buried a step down from out top, got Colgate back to within 2 goals with 2.5 minutes left in the game, but it was Spallina that scored the dagger just a smidge over a minute later, and that sealed the deal for Syracuse. Spallina, he finishes the day 5 goals, 6 helpers. Owen Hiltz puts up 3 and 2, and line mate Trey Deer was good for 4 goals. John Mullen won 18 to 29 faceoffs. He picks up 12 GBs and had an assist. Jimmy McCool, folks. Jimmy McCool, after that Harvard game, people are like, you know what? Maybe Jimmy McCool's not the guy. But if we look at what Jimmy McCool has done so far this season, 82% against Jacks, 69% against Vermont, 56% against Towson, 52% in the loss to Maryland. That was the offense's bad. He had a good game. That 33% against Harvard that resulted in him, I believe, getting yanked. Everyone's there at that point questioning what the hell is going on with Syracuse and Cage. But since that game, Utah, 69%, Hopkins, 55%, Manhattan, 71%, Colgate, 60%. Now, yes, not all of these teams are top tier, but the win over Hopkins looks great, and he has been a very good goalie. He's been very, very, what would you call it, serviceable in net for the Orange here so far in almost every game other than one this season. So I'm a believer in McCool, and I think he's solidified himself now as a very good goalie in the ACC. But Mullen, 18 to 29, he's got to continue that for Cuse now that they're going to hit this ACC stretch up. So moral of that story, McCool has earned his spot. The Connors, Liam, 2 goals, 3 helpers. Rory, 2 and 2. They were both very good for Colgate. Liam was bothered heavily, though, throughout the game. He was forced into 5 turnovers. Rory took 10 shots and only scored the 2 goals. So credit the Syracuse defense with making it difficult for the Connor boys, forcing Colgate to find offensive production elsewhere. And this score here, a 2-goal game in this Syracuse Colgate matchup, or a 4-goal game here. That's a very good win, I think, for Syracuse here. Colgate is a good team. Colgate's the bane of their existence so far this season has been slow starts, but they've finished games strong as they did here to claw back into it. You're down 8-2 going into the half, but they come back. They outscore Syracuse 6-5 over the third, 4-3 over the fourth. So credit to Colgate for getting back into it, but this is actually a very good win over a solid ranked team that I think you're going to see do well as they get into their, their Patriot League play. So Colgate, they have Navy up next, and Syracuse has Virginia up next in Charlottesville. So that's going to be a hell of a game here, one I am very excited to watch. Number 4, Cornell beat up on Yale here. And the only thing we can talk about here is Kirst is a filthy, dirty, rotten scoundrel. He scores 8 goals, I think it was, in the first half off 9 shots, if that's the correct stat line. He finished with 9 goals and a dish. Ryan Goldstein went for 2 goals and 8 helpers. Yale was once again allergic to playing defense. Yale didn't play bad, though. I mean, in terms of offensively, over the course of the first half, they hung. They stayed in the game here. They were down, 12-8 by halftime. So it's not great, but that third quarter is what got them 4-1, and that's the ball game, 19-14 for Cornell. And the Bulldog, like I said, that defense for Yale, it continues to be their Achilles heel. Cornell didn't do much better in terms of playing defense against Yale, but I just keep waiting for Lyons and Leo Johnson to show up consistently. Lions, 5 goals, great game for him. Leo Johnson, 1-3, not bad, but it was just not enough in terms of a goal scoring fest. And Cornell outscored Yale, which is what we assumed Cornell was going to have to do. Defensively, they looked good early in the season. Now that they're into the meat of the schedule here, their defenses looked a little bit more suspect. But as long as they can continue to outscore teams, they're going to be okay. So they improved to 6-1. Cornell has Penn up next, as Yale will take on Brown, who just lost to Dartmouth here. We'll talk about that very briefly, but Dartmouth, man, putting together a good season so far. Richmond continued to build their tournament resume on Saturday. They pick up a 1-goal win over number 13, Georgetown. Now, while this game appeared to be tight, and it was by the end, Richmond controlled it from the outset. They jump out to a 5-3 first quarter lead, 8-4 by halftime. At one point in the third, had a 12-5 advantage before the Hoyas finally woke up. They score 7 of the game's final 8 goals, and they get themselves back to within a goal with 1:08 left. And then it actually did. Georgetown did win the ensuing faceoff, got 2 shots off that required Zach Vicue to make a save with 22 seconds left in the contest to hold on for the victory. Because this was on Flow, you're all going to have to eat shit. You get no highlights or anything cool like that, despite the fact this being an excellent game by the end. Even the tool that put this up on YouTube put a freaking watermark up on it like he was some kind of savage. It's like, no chance I'm letting you steal my revenue, you douchebag, over a freaking watermark, which is what he's going for. Aiden O'Neill, 2-4. Lucas Littlejohn, 3-2 for Richmond. They paced Richmond in scoring. Mitchell Dunham forced 5 turnovers defensively, picked up 6 G-balls. Picked up 6 GBs on the defensive side for the Spiders. This is a very interesting Richmond team at this point, sitting at 6-3. Listen, I don't think they can get an at-large bid. If they don't win their conference tournament, they're not getting into the NCAA tournament. But, a loss to Maryland doesn't look bad. That win over UVA looks good so long as UVA finishes strong and remains above 500. The 1-goal loss to Cornell is great. That 1-goal loss to Duke, not terrible, but I would have liked to have seen them pull that one out, but now a win over Georgetown. They're going to get into conference play. They got the Bonnies, Hobart, High Point, UMass, and St. Joseph, so not a lot of chances to pick up high-quality wins. Like I said, they only have 2 quality wins at this point, with the win over Virginia that weighs heavily, and then this win over Georgetown. So they're going to have to win their conference tournament to get into the NCAA tournament, but it's still an interesting resume and puts them on the bubble, even if they were to lose, let's say, their conference finals to a team like St. Joseph's or UMass, who are at least quality teams, so it wouldn't drag them too badly here. But Richmond, hell of a team here so far. Good for them. The Hoyas have Providence up next. As I said, Richmond takes on the Bonnies. Whoops, I was like getting ready to talk about that game again here. Harvard, Princeton. Now, Princeton controlled this game from start to finish for the most part, despite Coulter Mackesy putting up a pedestrian 2 goals, 2 assists. Nate Kabiri also had that same exact output. He was 2-2. Ryan Croddick made goals tough for Harvard to come by thanks to his 17-save effort. As we will see right down here, he's 61% between the pipes. Princeton defense did a bang-up job of keeping Sam King quiet. I believe King only had a single goal. Nope. He had a goal and a helper off 7 shots. But, you keep Sam King quiet. It's going to help your prospects here in terms of trying to come out with a win. Now, Harvard, their struggles continue at the faceoff dot here. They continue to lose. I think they've only been 50% at the faceoff dot once all year, and that was just one guy. It might not even have been the team finishing that high. This was not a terrible outing, but still not great. And you cannot continue to lose that faceoff battle in every game you play and expect to pull out victories as you're weaseling into the meat of your Ivy League schedule. Now, granted, that formula worked against Syracuse. It's just not a great formula to keep in practice here over and over again. Credit to the Harvard offense and defense, both for allowing them to keep pace in games where they are getting just absolutely demolished at the stripe. Princeton books another win after that loss to Cornell. The Tigers' only losses are to Maryland and the Big Red. They've got Dartmouth up next. Dartmouth has been a sneaky good lacrosse team as they're coming off that win over Penn. Should be another solid test for the Tigers, though, so that'll be good. Harvard has Boston U at home. After Boston U beats Army, it could be a good chance for Harvard to continue to improve their resume if they could get a win over the Terriers here. Rutgers and Johns Hopkins. Now, maybe Hopkins isn't back Rutgers, they come out, play a complete game as they beat Hopkins 11-8 in Baltimore. Rutgers defense held Matt Collison to just a single goal on 3 shots. Charlie Eiler was the only multiple goal scorer for Hopkins. He had 3 goals. Cardin Stoller, 10 saves versus 8 goals against for Rutgers. A very solid outing against a Hopkins team that's now struggling to win 1v1 matchups. They're struggling to get quality shots off. Rutgers hasn't been the picture of health this season by any means. They've got a loss to Princeton and Army. No one gets mad at them for that, but those uncharacteristic losses for Rutgers to Stony Brook, St. Joe's, and UMass, that had many people scratching their heads. Sadly, this win over Hopkins does not help my top 20 poll vote today. It's going to make me have to think a little bit harder as I go through that. Hopkins playing without Russell Melendez. I think this is the 2nd game in a row. While Eiler has been a great surprise, as he's kind of been the guy that they've looked to try to create offense off the dodge. He's put up 3 points in each of the last 4 games he's played in. It's just it's not going to be enough here. Once Hopkins gets into the meat of the Big Ten play with teams like Ohio State and Michigan now looking good, and then you got Maryland and Penn State that they still have to take on. So wins in the Big Ten just got more difficult to come by, and Hopkins is struggling offensively. As good as their defense has been, they've struggled in cage a little bit. Stout, the transfer from Loyola, has struggled. This dude here, Galinis, has actually been okay since he's been spelling stout or whatnot, but the offensive woes are the problems here. Hopkins just not figuring out a way to put it together week in and week out offensively, and that's caused them to struggle overall here. Duke, Denver. This one surprised me here. Duke hasn't sold me. Coming into this game, they were 8-1, but they've been finding ways to win. They just haven't picked up a true signature win up to this point heading into this matchup against Denver. And they weren't going to get it against Denver. The Pios storm out to a 9-3 lead after 3 quarters. They held Duke scoreless over the 2nd and 3rd quarters as they built upon that lead. Once again, Andrew McAdory barely factors, 1 assist off 3 shots. Ben Johnston was 1 of 8 shooting, and no one else did enough for Duke offensively to be able to help them keep pace. To make matters worse, Duke dominated the faceoff dot with Engelke winning 16 of 21. They win 16 of 22 on the day. They dominate the possession battle, and it still just doesn't matter. Malcolm Kleben did play good. He had a solid game in cage, 11 saves, 6 goals against, so credit to him for that. But once again, Duke just cannot get it going offensively. And to make it even worse for Duke, there is no chill in the rest of their schedule here. Notre Dame next, then Boston U, who's looking tough, Carolina, Syracuse, and Virginia. I mean, it's like Boston U and Virginia should be on paper the 2 easiest games they have left, but none of those games are a game that you would call easy with the way that Duke's been playing offense and struggling in cage and all of this crap here. So that's just not great. Denver, they have Villanova up next. I think their only shot at a tournament bid here is to win the Big East tournament. Their problem's just going to be banking a quality win from here is going to be tough. You got Georgetown as really the only ranked team left that you have to play. You've got that Yale loss doesn't look great. And every time that Johns Hopkins loses, that loss looks a little bit worse. So you see here just no quality wins to be had and not a lot of chances to come up with more. So Denver's pretty much going to have to win their conference tournament here. Duke's just going to have to try to pick up as many quality wins as they can with the remainder of their schedule. Both of these teams are probably, you'd call them firmly on the bubble, I would say at this point. And that's stupid to say because Duke's 8-2. It's just with the schedule they have left, I presume there's a good chance Duke ends up 10-4, 10-5, something to that effect. And I'm just not sure that ends up being good enough because they haven't beat those top ranked teams here yet. St. Joe's and Providence, Ben Dutton goes 6-1. Richie La Calandra seems like he's been playing college lacrosse for 15 years now. 2-3. They combine for 12 points as St. Joe's beats up on Providence. I just wanted to mention that one because St. Joe's, another one of the teams I was sleeping on after they lost their first 2. They lost to Sacred Heart, I thought looked bad. In hindsight, doesn't look as bad as it was. The loss to Duke, that's okay. But now they've strung together 7 straight wins with a win over Penn. That's okay. Win over Rutgers is going to look better. Towson, even if they can continue to win games, they're 3-5 now, and they could get themselves back to above 500 as long as they can handle some business in conference play. So yeah, I figured I'd talk about St. Joe's quick. They have been impressive. Utah and Virginia. Truett Sunderland 3-3. McCabe Millen 2-3. Ryan Colsey 3-1, Griffin Schutz 3-1. All of the usual suspects showed up for Virginia, but almost no one else did, as we only had 3 other guys that put up a point in this game. That's been one of the problems for Virginia. Consistency in terms of scoring depth, consistency in just winning one-on-one matchups. We say that over and over again, but the teams that struggle offensively, generally that ends up being the truth. They're either going to turn the ball over way too often, or they're going to struggle to draw slides, and I think that's been one of Virginia's biggest problems here so far this year. I think one thing that looks good for Virginia is Matthew Nunes has bounced back. He's roped together 2 solid outings, 61% in the win over Albany, 55% yesterday. He's been up and down. Morris even spelled him, and Morris is breathing down Nunes' neck, but Nunes has to feel better with back-to-back solid games as Virginia gets back above 500. As I said, Virginia has Syracuse up next in Charlottesville, so it's going to be a telling outing for both Syracuse and for Virginia in that one. And then, like I said, we had a couple other games that I wanted to just touch on briefly. Loyola loses to Lafayette here. That was a game they badly needed to win, so Loyola is pretty much tanked here, and they're going to drag everybody's schedule down. Dartmouth beats Penn in overtime. And as the title says here, they're fine with the doubters. But yeah, Dartmouth is 7-1 right now. Once again, not an incredibly tested team, with Penn being that first real test. But you know, they got to win. That loss to UMass is the only blemish on their schedule. Vermont victory. Now this win over Penn. They have Princeton up next, which is really going to be telling for Dartmouth. But hey, man, I like Dartmouth. Dartmouth's going to go into that game, and they're going to be pumped and feel pretty damn good against Princeton here. So that's solid. Let's move back here again. What else do we got to talk about here? Towson wins against Stony Brook in overtime. And like I said with Towson, yeah, they lost 4 in a row to start the season out. That did not look great. They get a win over UMBC and then drop 1 to Virginia. But now 2 wins in a row over a solid Delaware team and over a good Stony Brook team. And now as you look at the remainder of their schedule, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for them to string, you know, let's say they could win 5 of 6, 4 of 6, and they get themselves back to 500, and it looks better for everybody's schedule here overall. And then the big one, and then I didn't talk about it, but High Point beating, and this one, let's talk about this one briefly, because I think this is important here. Carolina, the way that they're playing right now, offensively, we knew they were going to be good. We knew they were going to score points. Defensively, they hadn't been bad, but holding High Point here to 2 goals in this win, I think that's a much bigger deal than what most of us are going to assume, because you look at the outputs of teams that they've played here. They're keeping teams generally in their last 4 games. They've kept everybody below 10 goals. I mean, that's a win over Penn. That loss to Princeton doesn't look, that's a solid loss and a good outing here. But Hofstra, Jacksonville, High Point beat them all up. Now they have Army they're at Army here, and that's going to be a big one for Carolina. I think Carolina should be able to handle Army. The now Army wounded should make it a much more interesting matchup come next weekend. But I think that Carolina wins that one. I think they win against Virginia, and I think Carolina has a very good chance of being 9-1 heading into that game against Duke. So Carolina's just sitting really pretty here overall. Good for them. And then we've got this big game tonight, Penn State against Ohio State. Like, this should be a killer game, one that I'm looking forward to watching. They have the entire the eyeballs of every Division I lacrosse fan can be on them here Sunday, playing this game alone late night. So that's it. I'm going to shut the hell up here. As you guys all know, I did not get the 2 weekday podcasts out because I got too busy with work. I had people just sick in my household. It was chaos here this week. So that's it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Come back Tuesday. I'm going to try to get that D3 podcast off on Tuesday. And that's it. Hoost is out. The LaxFactor Podcast.